Welcome to the Deep Chat.
All right, I have a hot take for you, Kyle. Can AI replace screenwriters? It's a hot topic right now because of the writer's strike and soon or existing AFTRA SAG strike, which is the Actors Guild.
So are we talking today or in 10 years?
Right, that's always the question. So let's do two yes/nos. Today,
No.
I'm going to be very generous and give you 15 years.
I was actually going to have a similar answer. Like 10 years out, we'll have an AI, not necessarily an AGI, but something capable of producing a screenplay at or above human level.
Okay, great. So my hot take would be today, no. 15 years from now, yes. But there's the devil's in the details and what that means for the larger industry.
Right.
It's not to say that all screenplays will be created by AI. But first, let me start and say that I do have a film degree as well as a master's in computer science for anybody listening. And I have written 10 screenplays, three of which were bought. I think 2 of which got made into movies. So it's something that I do know well. In my latest incarnation of my life, I am solely focused on technology, but screenwriting is always in my background. I spent a good 12 years doing it. So screenwriting is a complex thing. And I do have a lot of questions for Kyle as an AI expert as to how this can actually happen with screenwriting. So I'll start, Kyle, with the question of screenplays have very specific structures.
Yep.
Scenes feed into other scenes. You've got your A plot, your B plot. Sometimes you have a C plot. You have the 3-arc structure of a screenplay and a story. You have various typical structures for a hero's journey, which is the classic one, that's Star Wars. How does a large language model sort of tie those pieces together to make a coherent story? Because I don't know that right now I've seen an example of an AI writing, at least I definitely haven't seen an example of an AI writing an entire coherent script. And that's, 100 pages of a script.
One of the main reasons you haven't is because of the window size. All models so far that we know how to build, and this will probably remain so, they have some fixed window length that they look that far back in a conversation. And once you've moved past that, it's like that's completely gone. They have no long-term memory the way you and I do.
Oh, okay. So let me say, for instance, there's something established in Act 1 of the movie, which is basically where you set up the story, is in Act 1.
Right.
And then in Act 3, almost always, that thread that was that question that was engaged in Act 1 is resolved in a later act or Act 3. And there could indeed also be a major twist at the end of the movie, a la The Sixth Sense, that everything in context before that mattered. That twist at the end has to be logical and probable, even though you didn't see it. So everything has to build to that moment. And so I think what you're telling me is it's currently that window isn't big enough for it to really consider all of the things that came before and set up the dominoes that make you have that aha moment.
That's right. Now, that doesn't mean it can't, we aren't close or it couldn't do something passable because, by the time you get to the final scene, the first scene has left its memory, but maybe the momentum of what it wrote in the middle will carry it through. But for sure, a film that, I don't know if there's a term for it, like in media res or whatever, where you see maybe the last scene and then you come back to it. Something like that, it's essentially impossible for the models we have in 2023 to do that because of their window size.
Okay, again, models in 2023. So I would just, for lack of a better word, let's call it context. It doesn't have the full context of the script in memory and be able to stitch those pieces together. It's doing predictive text completion. And the window size or that context, once it leaves, the text prediction isn't going to be predicted upon based on, the earlier data it's missing in that window size.
That's right.
That can be solved once we have, faster or more memory within the models or more tunable parameters? What's the technical reason why that doesn't exist today?
Well, the most obvious one is the window size, and it's just, this is something we're on the path towards. You build it to kind of some engineering goal, and they picked a window size that obviously did produce an impressive model. I think that is one area we will see these systems expand on in the future. It's a natural, area to push forward. Let's get bigger and bigger window sizes. And of course, screenplays all have a finite length. They cannot go on forever. In fact, I think, what do they say? It's about a page a minute.
Correct.
And you don't want to sit through too long of a movie, and there's a limited amount of data that can fit on a page. And actually, screenplays are pretty sparse at that. They compress rather nicely. I think we'll be able to get that window size in the right range in the not too distant future. It just didn't happen to be the objective they set out so far.
So, one of the things the writer goes through when planning a story is those aha moments where, and the subtextual moments. But let's talk about an aha moment. At the end of Sixth Sense, you have this aha moment that, this is a spoiler. If you haven't seen it, stop. But at the end of Sixth Sense, you get this aha moment that the counselor, Bruce Willis, is a ghost. All of what comes before suddenly makes perfect sense. Try to explain to me how an AI, just by the window size, is going to tie together the different things it wrote so that moment is an aha moment. Because if it's still text prediction, if it's the LLM methodology of predicting the next word, writing, getting creative about defying expectations, whereas an LLM is about predicting what would be best for the story.
Well, it's configurable. An LLM has one parameter called the temperature, which controls the degree to which it's explorative in its selection during the next word prediction. And I believe behind the scenes there's some work on it tunes over time. Maybe that goes up and down in some smart way. Or if not, that's an interesting project for a grad student, that maybe specifically when applied to screenwriting, you would want the temperature to be very high in the middle, lots of craziness, and then tone it down and then turn that knob back up at the end. And that would be a very crude, low-level way of approaching that. But more so, there's another piece of this. It's not just the window size that's going to come into play, but also the fact that we can train it on a large archive of existing screenplays. So it's going to learn not just how to do next word prediction, but to do it in the context of what typical movies do. And typical movies have twist endings often.
Right, and they have scenes throughout that reinvent what's come before, maybe even just two scenes before.
Correct.
So understanding that structure, I can see where it could predict, okay, well, this is a good time, or this is a good place to put a twist.
I don't know that it would formalize in the way where it's like saying I'm going to have a twist once per 7 minutes, but it's that twists would emerge in its generative procedure.
Yeah, it's not deciding it. I think we have to be careful, actually, with the words we use. I know what you're saying, but I'm using human words
You're
to
anthropomorphizing a bit, yeah.
Yeah, yes. So to be clear, when I say that it knows or it concludes that this is a good time for a twist, it's not like a human concluding it. It's just statistically saying, okay, the next word, instead of it being goes forward, it could be falls down because you didn't expect it. Really, the training material, if you trained it on one genre of screenplays, to give an extreme case, let's say we trained it all on crime dramas, and we asked for a screenplay, it is probably going to give us something very oriented toward crime drama. It would do a good job of it. If we had asked it to give us a comedy, but we only trained it on crime drama, what would happen?
Well, you're not just training these models anymore on the screenplays alone. That wouldn't be sufficient. You're actually going to start from a base model, maybe the one Meta just released that's open source, and then you will extend that model by training on your data set, which is screenplays. So it's like base model plus extended into screenplays. And the base model will convey some notion of comedy. Maybe, like if you ask ChatGPT right now, write me a comedy script screenplay, I'm sure it can do it, but it's not specialized for that, but it has some notion of it. So that notion will carry over.
It's going to be falling back possibly to the base model, and is there a potential for some of the crime train stuff to leak into the comedy? Like it might be more prone to create a crime situation in the comedy.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, that's depending on how you do the training, and this would be a deliberate thing, you would be configuring your extended model with the degree to which it's influenced by the base model versus what you've extended it with. So that would be a hyperparameter you should be able to control.
I think we'll get a lot of people listening to this that have no idea what a hyperparameter is, but go ahead and explain that.
Sure. So parameter and hyperparameter, the distinction's not super important unless you want to get technical. So think of both as just a knob you might use. And, picture that Moog synthesizer with all these knobs all over it. You train them in different ways, you get different outputs and different sounds, and sometimes you have an intuition about how to make a good one, and sometimes you're just playing with the knobs and you get lucky. But it's an exploration of how you can fine-tune specific aspects of the machine or of the machine learning training to get a better than typical result in the output.
Would you think it would be better, let's say you're someone who only always writes crime drama or only always writes comedy, would it be better for that person to have the model that's only trained on the genre that they're interested in? What benefit do I get from having a model that was trained 100% on all screenplays?
Well, I mean, the benefit you get is a second perspective. Like, even though these things are expensive to run from the computer hardware point of view, they're really cheap on the per cost usage, like well under a penny. So why not ask for an example page from 5 different potential models you have, one trained on all screenplays, one trained on crime screenplays, and then you as the quote unquote writer, whatever you want to call this assembling task, decide amongst the submissions which one you want to use.
Got it. Having more information in some ways would be better, and having those options.
I mean, mostly what I'm trying to say is it's a black art, or maybe that's not an appropriate term, but like a mystic art or whatever you call it. Like it's
still an art.
Yeah,
it's still an art.
Yeah, but it's there's another sense I want to add to it, that it's like there's a bit of like quasi mysticism to it. There's a strong lack of a science here, primarily because it's a soft objective. What makes a good screenplay? Heck if I know, but sometimes there's a bit of randomness. You try this, you try that, and you'll get, there's an artistry to it for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what we're getting at, now we can shift to this topic of, well, what is going to happen here? Obviously, the Writers Guild wants some controls on how AI is used. So it's about more than that. The strike is about more than AI. It's actually about... So the main thrust of this writer strike is about streaming residuals, which I fully support. As we move to streaming, it's getting harder and harder for them to make ends meet, etc. But we're not going to go into that. Buried in there somewhere is this section about artificial intelligence, and that's what we're talking about here. So they want strict controls about when AI can be used, whether or not AI can be trained to be like a particular writer, or whether or not a writer's material can be trained, used for training. So that makes sense. Not going to get into that either. It's definitely an open question that needs to be explored. And I think what we can do on here, given our knowledge, is to just help people understand what's possible and then where this might be headed. Where it might be headed, when I put my technologist hat on and my writer's hat on, the first thing that I can see, especially given what we talked about, is that I would love to have a tool as a writer where I say, okay, you've seen some of the stuff I've already written. You know the characters because I've inputted them into the tool. Please write a scene with this prompt. And it gives me the scene. I go ahead and I look at the scene and I like it or I don't. Maybe I have a new twist on it. I say, hey, no, I want you to generate this and make this character a little bit more this or a little bit more that. A little angrier, a little happier. I'd like the tone of it to be this, that, or the other. Even just generating one scene is a kickoff point for an idea. It's an inspiration moment. Because I will tell you, and I don't think I'm alone in this, but screenwriting or any kind of writing, it's really rewriting. And I like to call it screen rewriting because the first draft is quite often the hardest thing to produce. So if you can skip to a first draft, get through the first draft, and you can start exploring new ideas and finding inspirations from that generated text, it might actually speed up or increase the quality of good writing. Just because inspiration comes from a lot of different places, and often it comes from just getting the first draft out. You can listen to any writer talk about this. They might jump around from one scene to another, but getting the whole script done, the first draft, is a huge undertaking that gives you a great spot to jump off and actually develop something better. There is no screenplay that was written that I am aware of, and if anybody claims otherwise, they're probably lying, that the first draft was the production draft. I can promise you that's never happened. The point here is that AI should really be able to help augment what it's like to get to that first draft and help you with inspiring a particular scene. Now, let's say you're one of those people who are like, no, I must write the first draft. That's great. Having a tool that you can go in and select a scene and say, hey, I need this. I like this scene, but the subtext is missing, and I need the characters to find a way to get a little more confrontational with each other. Layered on top of your old scene, you see a new scene pop up, you read it, you accept it or reject it. It's almost like, a diff tool is just a comparison tool for accepting or rejecting new ideas in the screenplay. And I really think that's where it's headed. It's headed as any tool that, like you brought up Moog earlier. Moog is a tool that musicians use, right?
Yeah, it's a synthesizer.
Now, up until now, screenwriters don't really have that option. There's no knob to turn. And one of the biggest issues with most screenwriters or writers in general is not writer's block. I mean, that is an issue. What do I do next? Like, you might get stuck and it might take you an hour to get into the flow of writing. Now you'll never be stuck. If you've got writer's block, have it generate something that maybe inspires you. Twist some knobs. Get inspired by this new layer that it added to the screenplay. That's why we have other people read our screenplays, is to get feedback about what's working and what's not. That's an exciting moment. And the sooner I can get to having a whole screenplay that someone can read, the better. I'm certainly not a Luddite. Maybe there are people out there who just don't accept this. Maybe those are the same people that didn't accept digital images or digital filmmaking, and that film is the only way to go because it looks better, it feels better, etc. I would rather be on the cutting edge producing higher quality content and leverage these tools than not. So that's my take on it. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think people are against it in the Luddite sense. I think people are more deniers. They're always saying, a machine couldn't do what I do, is more of the contrary point that I hear.
Well, I hear that a lot, yes. But I think we're getting to a point where people do realize that machines are going to be able to do what they do, and I think they're scared.
I mean, we'll have to see, right? Maybe those people are right. I don't think so. But in the more shorter term than when we find that out, I think there's one thing that's for sure. AI isn't necessarily going to take your job. Your colleague who uses AI is going to take your job.
100%. That's right. It's going to create a new ground for new writers who have a new process to explore new ideas and iterate quicker. And I'm looking forward to that personally. It's similar to a future where, and we're not there yet, but a future where I'll be able to write a scene, have that scene be generated into a film, and just watch it myself with actors' voices embedded in it. And it'll be a rough idea, but you'll be able to play around with the camera angles and everything else just from the screenplay. It's a decent ways off for that. But imagine the creativity that is going to unleash for those who don't mind using that tool.
Decisions that might otherwise have been made sort of impromptu on a set without a lot of forethought can now be excruciatingly dwelled over.
Right. It'll make an interesting tool for directors. We might see more of the tyrant director who says, no, it's got to be done exactly this way because that's how I visualized it in my AI tool.
Well, if we're talking just about the writing portion, which precedes the actor's performance and those things, which are additional challenges, you're saying it's a tool that can empower screenwriters. What if it's a tool that empowers film studios to produce the most generic media possible?
Well, like anything, anytime you produce something generic or derivative, it doesn't really get watched. So there's not really an incentive for them to produce content that's mediocre. What I think is more concerning is that a smaller set of people can do a larger amount of the work with AI. Maybe your writer's team goes from 10 people to 2 because they each have an AI partner with unlimited resources. I think that's more scary and the reason why they should be looking at, protections there.
Yeah, I see the fear that that team of 10 could become a team of 2, or possibly that team of 10 becomes 5 independent teams of 2.
Right, generating individual scripts and then bake off between them, or
Or just that there's more overall output.
right, yes,
You know, we should be able to drive down the cost of filmmaking through this process too, so more films can be produced and films of smaller budgets can be successes with smaller audiences.
I do think the future will have more rapid content, and just as a result of the rapid content, you'll probably get more mediocre content. I do think that will happen. I don't fear it, though, in terms of jobs and quality, because the quality is still elusive no matter what. I mean, how many hit shows are there?
Yeah.
It's lightning in a bottle.
Very true.
And it's going to continue to be elusive even if an AI does it, because an AI doesn't have the context of what's going on in the world and people's overall psyche. They just have historical training data.
Yeah.
And we've done an episode on that before, whether or not you can predict wars and conflict through books and novels that are written at that time period.
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of jobs, that's where the real concern is. More people, smaller number of people doing equal or more amount of work. I think that's what they need to be concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, I said, hey, maybe that team of 10 will turn into 5 teams of 2. What's probably going to happen is the team of 10 turns into 2 teams of 3, which gets us to 6, and a team of 2, which gets us to 8, and there are 8 jobs instead of 10.
And we get more content as a result of it.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, the truth, though, is that we can produce more screenplay content, but if we can't get that content shot and developed,
Right.
the budget's just not going to be there to see it through. My point here is that until the downstream technology, like everything starts with the script, when the downstream technology of generating films or animations from a script becomes better, that's the inflection point where you'll probably start to see a lot of mediocre content.
Yeah.
But until then, you still have to hand the script over to somebody who's going to produce it and shoot it or animate it.
Right.
I think we both agree in the near term, the answer is no, and perhaps in the long term, which we really didn't explore, that the answer is yes, but that primarily the concern should be about jobs more so than it should be about whether or not AI is going to have an impact on the creativity.
Well, there's one thing we should unpack that we didn't touch on, and that's the right to, say, hey, why don't you write me a screenplay in the style of Brad Bodie, and then I don't need to pay you anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty simple thing to talk about. The studio obviously would prefer it if they could generate a Quentin Tarantino script every day for the next 10 years, right?
Sure.
While that might be possible, I do think this is a similar argument to the argument that artists have, where Dali was trained on a wide array of art that was publicly available.
Not too different from most artists, but go on.
That actors need to be concerned about digital likeness rights because they're now generating, voices, or they will soon, be generating live video with those actors. I think that they're all a similar problem, is that what do you own in your voice? Not just the voice that you have speaking, like a voiceover artist or someone with a unique voice, but also in your scripts, which is kind of your writing voice. Do you own it? I tend to side with the fact that there should be protections for that to some degree.
I don't know how you do that, though. If it's like characters and you're like, oh, I invented this superhero, okay, that can be documented and clear. But the style of my prose, how are you going to claim, oh, you wrote it in my style? Come on now.
No, I don't think you can do that. But what I'm saying is if you're part of the Writers Guild, you should be able to say, I will allow my stuff or not allow my stuff to be used in training.
Oh, they're just going to do it anyways. Come on.
I mean, that may be true, but you should be allowed to say that.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Right?
I can sign a thing that says no one's allowed to bully me, too. Like, what's it for?
The cat's out of the bag. You
Yeah.
know, we've already seen that, maybe this doesn't have any legs, but they can say it and they can have rights in terms of their writing style. But again, yeah, how are you supposed to say, well, this was or wasn't written by AI that was trained on my data? It would be impossible.
Yeah, I'm being flippant not because I don't have sympathy for the writer who legitimately could be the victim of like a weird sci-fi theft here, but Like, let's maybe make a more practical, like Twilight Zone episode. Like, somebody goes in and they're desperate. They sell their likeness rights for $100, and suddenly they're this horrible villain in this awful thing that everyone has seen, and they can't even walk down the street anymore. You know, like that person should not have been blown up for $100.
That's right.
I don't know how we regulate that, but okay, there's a concrete no.
This issue is a little more difficult than an actor's actual physical voice, like James Earl Jones or Samuel L. Jackson. These people with these really unique voices. And then once we extend it into their face and their facial expressions, I can see where that is an easier to defend position. Like, you can't use my face because that's what people recognize. Okay, so what if with someone's voice or an image of someone, let's say, there was this viral video that had Samuel L. Jackson in it. Mm-hmm. Does he have the right to request that being taken down? Absolutely.
Living person, yeah, for sure.
Is it illegal to use? Should it be illegal to do something like that? My gut says for some reason that you should not. It should be a law that says you can't fake video of an individual person without getting their consent.
Yeah, there's something in there, like some caveats, living, non-historical, famous person, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I agree. There should be some formalism in law about this.
And the same thing goes with the voice, with their voices. So I'll give you one example that was interesting. I have a friend who's been on a long-running television show, and there was someone who'd been on it a long time, and they needed her voice, but and she was sick, and they needed to finish shooting. This happened recently. Uh-huh. She's very old, couldn't travel, so they had one of those AI voiceover training sets based on all this archived material. They trained her voice. They had the script, and all she needed to do in a voiceover was to have read it. So that's how they made it happen. They talked to her first. She got paid for her full rate, but they put in her voice via AI generated, and nobody's the wiser. But that's a good scenario where...
Why did she get paid?
Well, she got paid because it's her voice.
Well, but the alternative, I mean, this isn't the first time someone's been sick. They would just had a stand-in try and mimic her voice for the continuity of the series.
Oh, that's true. That's a good...
Right, so... What's the difference here?
And that person would have gotten paid as opposed to as opposed to her.
Yeah, we can't pay you. We had to pay the fill-in.
Well, I think they're trying to set a precedence for how people should be treated when they're pushed out of a job, so to speak. Now, what if it wasn't for being sick? If it was for another reason? Don't know. It's a good question.
I don't want to say this offensive racist thing you want my character to say, and then they do it anyway.
Oh, jeez. That's a brutal one.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'd like that because that's that person's voice. So again, you should be able, similar to you can't have someone on video that looks like Samuel L. Jackson doing something horrible. You shouldn't be able to take their voice and have them say something horrible and claim it's actually them.
Yeah, likeness rights is going to get interesting.
Very interesting. So, all right, more on that another time.
For sure.